Welcome to our Facebook Live group tonight as we have a broadcast with our special guest, Pastor Mike Stone. This is for our SBC 21 Presidential Nominees Q&A group. So we hope that it'll be informative to you and that you'll gain some insight into this one of our presidential nominees. Now, tonight we're going to be talking with Pastor Mike about most all the big issues that are facing the Southern Baptist Convention right now. We'll talk about GCR, the Great Commission Resurgence, North American Mission Board, issues related to the ERLC, critical race theory, and probably some other things as well. Plus, you can chime in and ask your questions. So if you'll take just a moment, you can put your questions there in the comment box, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. But let's jump right on into our interview and talk to Pastor Mike. So, Pastor Mike, let's bring you on. We are so glad to have you with us tonight.
It's an absolute privilege to be with you. I'm grateful for you and Randy putting this together, and for all the folks watching live and those that will watch later. Just grateful for the opportunity to engage with Southern Baptists.
Absolutely. Now, Pastor Mike has been be coming up on 25 years in October at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Blackshear, Georgia. So he's kind of down the road from me here in East Atlanta, but had a great ministry there, tremendous ministry there. Church has seen lots of growth over the years. Now, we're not going to get into a lot of the biographical stuff because we want to use our time to let him answer some of these questions that are kind of on the forefront these days. So, Pastor Mike, let's jump right into it. One of the things that you have said is you have actually asked the question, is the ERLC the best way for Southern Baptists to address policy issues, public policy issues now? Unpack that for us. Explain a little bit.
Well, part of that is just to differentiate a policy and an organizational question from anything that is personality or driven or based on any individual. I do think that we need to seriously ask the question as to whether or not having an ERLC is the best and most efficient and effective way for Southern Baptists to engage on these issues, whether that's writing about ethical issues from a biblical worldview perspective, or engaging on lobbying efforts, engaging political and cultural issues in that regard. Part of that is because of finances, and part of it is because of just a desire for greater unity among the churches and the leaders of the Southern Baptist Convention. So let me just kind of handle those one at a time. From a financial perspective, the ERLC receives 1.65% of the CP allocation budget that goes through the national office there in Nashville. Now, this year, you're somewhere around 180 something million dollars. It's a little bit lower because of concerns over budget cuts with COVID, but 1.65% has historically, in recent days, been around $3.25 million, and the ERLC raises another portion of its funding from other sources, other sources of income. But $3.25 million goes out of the budget. And I think it's a legitimate question to begin to ask, would those cooperative program dollars be better spent on other missionary endeavors, while perhaps we could bring some lobbyists and other workers in that particular field of ministry, bring them perhaps under the purview of the executive committee that could address these issues. I know in the state of Georgia, we have an Office of Public Affairs, and we have some employees in that office that write for our state paper. They write for outside press sources, and they engage as lobbyists at the state capitol on issues that would be of concern to Georgia Baptists. So I think that we could potentially save some money in that regard. I also think that the current climate in America, as well as within the Southern Baptist Convention, places the president and senior staff of the ERLC almost in a no-win situation. You're asking them by assignment, by their missions and ministry assignment, to speak into issues that are hot topic, controversial issues facing the country, the culture, and the churches of the convention. And I think that you really place those leaders in as I say, in a situation where, to baptize an old phrase, cursed if you do and cursed if you don't. And I would say that regardless of who would be serving as the president and the other senior staff of the ERLC, it's just an organizational question. Is this the best approach for us to be taking? Many of our seminaries, as well as other biblically based think tanks and Christian organizations, have a lot of writings and research about ethical issues. So I think pastors and other church leaders who may be preaching on issues that have a cultural relevance, things like euthanasia, abortion, immigration reform, addressing those from a biblical worldview. There are other sources available, especially with the explosion of the internet, that I think that pastors and leaders in the SBC could avail themselves of, perhaps at a cheaper and more efficient use of our cooperative program dollars.
Yeah, the ERLC has kind of been a lightning rod. And really, as long as I can remember, as a young pastor, there was always something. Richard Land was, in there most of the time that I remember as a young pastor. And so just because you're dealing with so many controversial issues with public policy. So, but one of the things that's happened just recently that really has stirred up a flurry of conversation and critique and criticism and pushback against the ERLC is their filing of this amicus brief, where they actually stated in that amicus brief that was being filed that the SBC was an umbrella organization and that the SBC or Southern Baptists have a hierarchical system in polity. What have you seen, or what do you feel like needs to be done when the ERLC seems to dive off to an extreme for whatever reason? They were coming to the defense of the North American Mission Board, and that's another case we can talk about. But what's your feeling about them using this kind of terminology?
Well, I think most of the viewers are perhaps familiar with the fact that they signed on to an amicus brief by a Catholic organization, the Thomas More Society, and it was a rushed job. It came in, as I understand it, sort of at the last minute for them to get under the deadline to file an amicus brief in that case. It contained language that the lead attorney for the convention, it was also the lead attorney for the executive committee, made a statement, and you can find this statement in the ERLC task force report. We spend several pages in that report and some great detail kind of diving into this issue, which I think is a gross, egregious error on the part of the ERLC that could have potentially had existential ramifications, negatively so, for the future ministries of the Southern Baptist Convention. But the lead attorney made a statement, I don't have it in front of me, but it was something to the effect of, the idea that the Southern Baptist Convention is a hierarchical organizational structure, an umbrella structure that governs its member churches, should hurt the ears of anyone even remotely attuned to Southern Baptist polity. I think it was an egregious error on several different fronts. One is just a factual error. Secondly, you're making a factual error that if you read the report, they knew it was a factual error before they filed it. They knew it was a factual error when they filed it. They knew it was a factual error in a federal appeals court that sat there for the better part of 4 months. It was only when the ERLC task force that was under my leadership as the chairman inquired as to why they had yet to in any way engage the court and withdraw that particular statement. There's a question as to whether or not they could withdraw the brief, but they could in some way correct the record. It was only after there was pressure from key voices around the Southern Baptist Convention, most notably the ERLC task force itself under my chairmanship. That's the only thing that got them to begin to contact the court and inquire as to how they may remedy that egregious filing. It's not only a doctrinal error, because that's inconsistent with our ecclesiology, which is itself a doctrinal issue. But I believe it's an ethical error to knowingly file a false brief with a court. And again, that was done knowingly, and it took 117 days from its filing for the ERLC to in any way engage the court and begin to correct that record. So I think it is a very egregious error.
Yeah, it really is. And now they have actually filed another amicus brief with the Supreme Court. And this was to support a petition from the North American Mission Board. The amicus brief we were just talking about is the one that was filed to the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court in the Will McRaney case with North American Mission Board. And you're right. I totally agree with you that it's fairly egregious that there's just no way anybody who's been connected with Southern Baptist for any length of time would have any clue that it's hierarchical. It's just beyond imagination. But now in this petition they filed to the U.S. Supreme Court, they've joined together with some other groups again that are they're not Southern Baptist groups, so all of their structures are different than what ours are. What is your feeling about them filing this amicus brief after all the blow up that happened with the other one?
It's a case, among other things, of tone deafness. First of all, just the fact that there was such an outcry, and rightly so, about the amicus brief that was filed in the lower court, and then to have signed on with these other groups. And I'm one that, from a legal perspective, I understand that sometimes there will be briefs of this nature that we'll sign on to with people who do not share our doctrinal beliefs, some that we may not even consider Christian. But in the current case, because much of the argumentation is about the issue of polity, it seems odd that we would be signing on with other organizations who do not share our polity structure, and I think fundamentally do not understand it. Bobby, one of the things that Southern Baptists need to be very, very aware of is that when you start dealing with the autonomy issue between entities of the SBC, entities of state conventions, all the way down to the local church and associations, the issue of ascending and descending liability is a very, very precious thing, not just from a doctrinal perspective, as we embrace that, again, from an ecclesiological perspective. We embrace that biblically as Baptists, but it is a tremendous protection for our individual churches, as well as for every layer and level of Southern Baptist life. The last thing that we need to have happen is for the Southern Baptist Convention as an entity, and the executive committee is in many ways the holder of the pocketbook, if you will, for the SBC. The last thing we need is for our national convention to be liable for things that happen on the campuses and under the ministries of each of the 47,000 member churches of the SBC. Technically, the churches aren't members, and the last thing that my church needs is to have some perception of liability for anything that would happen at the state convention, at the national convention, or at any of the entities of the state or national convention. So that ecclesiological separation is a very, very precious, precious thing, not just biblically, but also financially and legally.
Yeah, let me ask you to expound just a little bit on one thing you said, just for clarity, because some of our people in our group may not fully understand, but the Southern Baptist Convention, you use the term members or members. All of our entities, our seminaries, our churches, explain how they are not members of the Southern Baptist Convention, because that's a little bit of a foreign kind of structure, right, unless you've been kind of on the inside.
Yeah, I think sometimes we use, even with some of our denominational press, and you'll hear denominational leaders speak about, for example, 14.5 million members of the Southern Baptist Convention. Well, the reality is there are not 14.5 million members, because individuals are not members of the Southern Baptist Convention. And technically and legally, there are not even 47,000 member churches of the SBC, because not even churches are technically members of the convention. There are around 47,000 churches, that's just a round number that we use, that we would qualify and describe as being in friendly cooperation with the convention. These are churches that we would recognize messengers from their churches at our annual meeting. Most of the viewers are probably aware that the Southern Baptist Convention doesn't even exist except for a couple of days a year. And even when it does not exist, and when it is in session, the churches that we commonly say are members of the SBC are not technically members. The SBC has no members in that regard.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Now, you're a member of our SBC 21 presidential group, and there's lots of discussion, lots of things been brought up, but one of the most heated discussions that have happened really just in the last week, although there have been a number, but in the last week, there's been a lot of discussion about this amicus brief, the second one that was filed by ERLC to the Supreme Court. And one of the real concerns that has surfaced, and there are people kind of on both sides, some feel like the amicus brief is reinforcing kind of what was said before, just prettier language in the previous amicus brief. Others say, no, it's saying there's no hierarchical language at all. Regardless of that, let's don't even talk about one way or the other. But what if NAMB does win that petition to the Supreme Court? What do you think will be the impact if NAMB wins the way that thing is being presented at this point?
I don't personally, and I'm not a legal expert, and I don't want to pretend to be. So I'm speaking very much as a layman, albeit an informed layman. Layman in this context, as far as I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an attorney, but I don't think, from what I understand, that there's a lot of danger as far as infringing on the autonomy of the local church, because our churches are autonomous, and even if someone else is making a claim that might seem as if it infringes upon that, that doesn't change reality. I do think that, as I understand the case, and I have not become an expert in the underlying case, but I do pray regularly for resolution and reconciliation in this. Um, I told someone about a week ago that I really wish that the Supreme Court would decide in a way that it would go back and find a trial where we could have determination of fact, because there are issues other than the contract issues, potentially partnership agreements between the state convention and NAMB, but also questions of, was Mr. McCraney harmed in some way personally in his future pursuits? And I think that's something that really needs to be looked into. I would have zero problem whatsoever in the calling of witnesses and a determination of that fact by the lower court. But in this current case, I don't think personally that there's danger that would infringe in any way on the autonomy of the local church. But what I was going to say is, I told someone last week that my prayer and my desire would be that that it would go back to the lower court to trial. But even beyond that, my greater prayer is that there could be reconciliation even prior to that time. And I think that would be a great witness and testimony to an onlooking world. So that's my prayer. And I do really pray for that regularly. It's on my prayer list that we could see reconciliation in that regard.
Now, that definitely would be a positive thing. And I know Dr. McCraney has publicly said that he has reached out and he's tried to do that, but he hadn't gotten much response. Let me ask you another question. You had mentioned a while ago about being on the executive committee and then being chair for 2 years, I believe, on that committee. All of this that's been going on between North American Mission Board and McCraney has been going on during that time frame. What kind of things did you guys consider as an executive committee to try to help encourage a remedy? Does an executive committee not have some power to be able to encourage the entities to be able to do what's right and try to get resolution?
Yeah, I would actually argue that the executive committee doesn't have near the power that a lot of its critics would claim that it does. What I can say is that my position is, as I've already stated, I think that there's a place where the leadership of the convention could have filed an amicus brief to make sure that there was great clarity with the court on the autonomy issue. As the chairman of the executive committee, we may get into this particular discussion on other issues, but the chairman of the executive committee doesn't have any kind of unilateral or dictatorial authority even within the executive committee. The EC chairman has no power or authority at all unless the executive committee or one of its subcommittees is actually meeting. And much of that, as you could imagine, when you're discussing legal matters, those discussions are highly confidential. And one of the things that, quite frankly, and just being very candid with you, that is very difficult is to be, in my case, to be publicly criticized for supposedly not having done something or sought to get something done, when in fact, behind closed doors, where those conversations would really matter and would really be significant, I advocate for some of these very things. I just don't go out and tweet about it and put on Facebook about it, because I don't think that's the proper role for the chairman of the executive committee, or perhaps even for the president of the convention, depending on what the legal matter before the courts might be.
Yeah, well, and Twitter is kind of a cesspool most of the time anyway. So uh, we know that's not probably the best place to get all your information. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Um, Back in Orlando in 2010, the convention approved the Great Commission Resurgence, the GCR, in 2010. And looking back now, after basically 10 years, we can look back and we see that the outcomes, the metrics that should have been really exploding in a positive way, are all down, significantly down. Church planting's down, evangelism's down. Almost anything you can measure is down. What is your view of what we're facing now as a Southern Baptist Convention? Some of these trends that have come in because of the GCR. It doesn't look like there's any move to try to change or redirect, even though there are people calling for that. What do you see as the impact of this, and what do we need to do moving forward?
Yeah. Well, Brother Bobby, I would add a slight edit to your question, and it's a friendly edit, a friendly amendment. I think you would be in agreement with it. You said something just now to the effect of 10 years later, we can now see these things. Many of us saw these things 10, 11 years ago. And I don't think
That's
that we
true.
should be given prophet status for that, because some of them seem to be rather obvious just based on being a student of human nature and organizational nature. Many of us at the time the GCR task force was going through its work shared these concerns. I wrote about it, blogged about it at the time. And that's difficult when many of my friends, people that I would count as, in many ways, heroes, if I could use that word, men who have accomplished tremendous things for God's kingdom, were leading part of that effort. So I think that was well intentioned. I think it was rightly motivated, but no less than our then executive committee president, Dr. Morris Chapman, wrote at some length about what the unintended negative consequences would be. Now, just because they're unintended does not mean that these negative consequences were unforeseen. Uh, and unfortunately, I remember blogging about it at the time when blogging was really a thing, um, just stating that I would pray that the future would prove me to be wrong, because I did not wish for the failure of this effort. Anytime somebody tries to reorganize and restructure for the sake of the Great Commission and planting churches and reaching the lost, we should, of course, fervently pray for and cheer on that success and pray that God would bless it with spiritual success. But I think that the statistics are bearing out that that approach has not worked. And one reason is structurally, and it's some of what we see even on these other issues, there's a shifting of focus, a shifting even of finances away from Baptist boots on the ground to our national entities. And there's an illustration that I use in my own church leadership, and I think it fits here. And that is, if you imagine a construction crane, if you want that crane to be able to reach up higher and reach out further and carry heavier, move heavier loads, you've got to be sure that you don't undermine that base. And I think that that is one of the challenges of the GCR task force recommendations, is it shifted a lot of emphasis away from the local Baptist boots on the ground, from state conventions, some of which are now seen in some people's minds as being obsolete and irrelevant. And it just shifted a lot of power to very increasingly powerful national entities. And one of the things that's happening is now we have indication that several of our state conventions don't even feel like that they are a viable cooperating partner in these efforts. And for the first time, as I understand it, in the history of the Southern Baptist Convention, last fall we had one of our state conventions at the state convention level negatively designated the North American Mission Board in their cooperative program allocation. I do think that at some point in the very near future, we need to just take a very serious and strategic look as to whether or not we took a step in the wrong direction. And Brother Bobby, I want to re-emphasize something that, to me, that's not a personal attack. That's not a personal criticism. I've made missteps here in my pastorate. You thought something was going to be a good idea, and it turned out not to be a good idea. And when that happens, and the ministry seems to be moving in not as helpful a direction, the wisest thing to do is to step back, hit the pause button, reevaluate, and if necessary, graciously and humbly start trying to move in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would fully agree with you. All of us have made mistakes along the way, but you're right. When you look at it and you evaluate it, I think 10 years, honestly, is too long. But when we saw at the 3, 4, 5 year mark what was happening, there probably should have been some evaluation. Well, let me ask you that we're going to stay on GCR, and we are going to go to our online comments here in just a couple of minutes. So, folks, if you're watching, make sure and type those into the comment section, and then we'll get back to you here in just a moment, and we'll stick with those probably close to all the way to the end. But still talking about the GCR for a minute, one of the things that concerned me way back in the beginning, and I'm right in line with you, I had a lot of concerns before it was ever approved, but they took the records of those meetings and sealed them ultimately for 15 years. And oddly enough, a lot of the people a lot over exaggeration, but a number of the people who were on that task force are now in key leadership positions. Many of them attached directly back to Dr. Moeller, and not to mar him, but in fact, I saw a map published not too long ago that showed all the connections, either through church or through Southern or whatever, at that point, which was, quite concerning, obviously. But all those documents being sealed, there's a lot of suspicion. Why are we hiding this? What is the only close to viable reason I heard was, well, there's confidential things. Okay, so our government does that all the time. It's confidential. You black out some things, but you make sure that the people know. And I guess my biggest concern, and probably many Southern Baptists, is these folks are operating with our Southern Baptist mission dollars. And what's happening at NAMB, what's happening with the ERLC, what's happening in our seminaries, man, that's, in part, a good part of our cooperative mission dollars. How do you feel about those records being sealed, and what do we need to do about that?
Well, I was asked about that recently. Let me back up to the Orlando convention. Again, I was not in favor of the recommendations. I voted against the recommendations, and some of them concerned me more than others, but I did vote against the report. I will also add that once the report passed, I did my best to move forward and try to join hands and lock arms with my Southern Baptist brothers and sisters and try to move forward and make every effort to prove my concerns to be short-sighted and inaccurate. That's not turned out to be the case. I was not in favor of the proceedings, the minutes, if you will, of the task force being sealed. I think that is a step in the wrong direction. But I want to be very candid with the viewers for this. I was asked at a recent meeting if I would be in favor of bringing a motion to unseal them. And I stated that would not be a priority of mine as president, simply because we're so far into that 15-year time where they're going to be open anyway. I think it would probably take a couple of years at the national convention level to garner the support to do that. That would become a major emphasis of whoever the next president will be. That would take up a lot of the leadership capital, if you will, for the next 2 years, and maybe just open those up a couple of years before they would have otherwise opened. And so just because of a timeline issue, I want to be clear that would not be a top-level priority for me. If they had been sealed indefinitely and there was no timeline that was ticking, so to speak, then I would seek to make some effort to get those unsealed. I think if there's information there, that Southern Baptists have a right to know what's there. And as you say, there may be confidential information in there. Most pastors understand that. But there's a difference, I think, between confidence and that which may be secret. I think Southern Baptists can be trusted with information. There's an old adage, trust the Lord and tell the people. Something like that, I think, would be a very wise approach for Southern Baptists to take.
Let me ask you on the line of secrecy also. Since the GCR, there has been just a proliferation, it seems like, of the use of non-disclosure agreements at various entities. Prior to GCR, in fact, I've asked around. I've talked to some people that have been around a long time. My mom actually worked at the Home Mission Board before it became NAMB. Talked to other people who had been at NAMB through the years. And I haven't found anybody who remembers North American Mission Board using NDAs or seminaries or others. I think that's a real concern because, again, it feels like there's a cap being put on what's being done. And honestly, I mean, I'm in East Atlanta now, and I've got a number of friends all around this area who at one time worked with the North American Mission Board. And you bring up something about the North American Mission Board with them, and they get quiet. And I asked a friend, he's a pastor of a church now, and I just asked him, I said, why won't you talk? He said, look, I can't afford to lose my retirement. And then okay, never mind. And I didn't want to make him uncomfortable pressing anything. It was just a conversation that a group of pastors was having. What is your feeling about our entities using these kind of NDAs? Why or why not?
Well, we always want to be careful not to make a blanket statement. There could be
Right.
some situation that I'm not thinking of right now, a very rare and extreme situation where that may be advisable for the protection of every party involved. But generally speaking, NDAs are used in the corporate world to protect corporate secrets. You imagine if you're working in R&D for a company and you go out and you don't disclose what the company may be working on. In this case, the product that we ought to be working on, by and large, ought to be something that our whole purpose is to tell it to the world. I do think that NDAs are generally ill-advised in Christian work, such as the Southern Baptist Convention, our entities, as well as other denominations and Christian organizations, because I think it can tamp down and hinder the sharing of information that perhaps could be embarrassing to that organization. But if the truth is embarrassing, then perhaps there needs to be embarrassment. On one occasion, when I was dealing with a situation, I won't be any more specific than that. Somebody said, "Well, Mike, if the truth comes out about that, you're pushing for the truth. That could cause that particular agency or ministry to shut down." And my response was, if it can't operate in the light of the truth, it needs to be shut down. So I'm not a fan of non-disclosure agreements. I don't use them in my church. I've never advocated for them in any ministry I've been a part of. I do, however, want to stop just short of saying that they are always wrong or that they're always necessarily sinful or ill-advised. There may be some exception out there that I'm not thinking of right now.
Yeah, I can agree with you. I understand about something that's proprietary or something of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to take a break, go to our comments. So I'm going to turn it over to Randy Starkey. If you'll pull up the first comment, if you'll remember, Randy's been trying to filter through all the comments that you're making and putting them together to get kind of the most popular comments and go from there. So Randy, take it away.
All right. Well, Mike, again, appreciate your time. And so I wanted to start us off on a real serious note. So this question comes from Zachary Minton. And so there you have it. Mike, what is your favorite ice cream?
Oh, that's a real tough one, but I've got to go with Rocky Road. Really anything chocolate related, but when you have chocolate nuts and marshmallow, I mean, that's not the holy trinity, but it's getting pretty close in the world of ice cream.
All right. Well, I saw that one. I thought that would be the best one to lead off with. So we only have a couple questions that have come in so far, and actually one of them I think you just covered here. By the way, Zach is appreciative of that answer, Mike. Let's see. Let me post another one. Actually, this was a serious one from Zach. Here it is. As a NAMB missionary, we have had people pull financial support due to things going on with NAMB. How important is it to you to take care of NAMB missionaries during this time, and how would you lead people to do it?
Well, Zach, thank you for that question. And I would say that the calls that I have tried to make through my ministry for openness and transparency, those calls do not necessarily impugn or necessarily imply that there's something hidden, but transparency is always a good thing. I'm gonna give you a local church example and then apply it to the specific question that you've asked. Here in the church that I'm blessed to pastor, we don't have a monthly business meeting. We have 2 business meetings a year. And so I regularly tell our congregation that our financial information is not regularly published, but it is never private. anyone can come at any time to the finance office and ask any question that they want to ask. And I publicly state that if the answer that is given isn't satisfactory to them, they can meet with me as the pastor. We'll call a meeting of the stewardship team. Our deacon fellowship is very actively involved in that matter as well. And if need be, we'll have a called conference of the church to address that financial situation. Now, the reason that analogy and that illustration applies here is because I think that not only promotes transparency, I think that promotes and increases giving. Whenever there is even the perception that something is wrong in terms of the stewardship issue by the leadership, that has a declining impact on the offering. So one of the ways that I think that we can take better care of all of our denominational employees is to make sure that we operate in a realm of transparency. And I think that also just promotes and fosters a sense of trust, which then can foster increased giving. The North American Mission Board, their assignment is vitally important to the work that we do at Southern Baptist. So your question, how important are they? How good a care should we take of them? I think we should take the very best care of all of our employees as we possibly can.
All right, Mike, thank you for responding to that. And now another one. This one comes in from a Facebook user. It doesn't give me who. Actually, I can look on Facebook and see. I believe it was from Rhett Adams. It just doesn't show up on the question. But this question is, do you support remote voting at the SBC? Do you see any potential pitfalls to this?
Yeah, when I was elected as chairman of the SBC Executive Committee in June of 2018, I did a fairly lengthy interview with our state paper, which is called the Christian Index. And the viewers can go find that. You can Google that. It would be June of 2018 from Dallas. And I mentioned several things that I wanted to try to accomplish as a chairman. And one of those was to investigate this particular question. At that time, there was not a lot of support for even looking into that at the officer or the staff level. I think what some people have in mind is the idea of a Zoom call that has 200,000 people on it. You know, it would only take 4 or 5 from each church to where you could have a number in that range. And no such technology exists to do something like that, where there's live, real-time participation from people in remote locations. I think that there is something, though, that could be very helpful, and that is just remote locations, to have some strategic locations across the country where you have to actually physically go. That would handle credentialing issues, that would handle a lot of the fear that the technology could be hacked, because the people would be there in real time voting in the same way that they would be voting at the main site for the annual meeting. I want to be clear that I'm not confident that would be the best step, but it's something I think that we should be willing to look into. One of the concerns and pitfalls even of that approach is that you would almost have to have a second level of messenger status, maybe an agenda that is published that only certain items, major items that were published in advance, that the people in the remote locations might be able to vote on, simply because when you're trying to move a convention that has it seems like every year we condense the schedule more and more. And so it's difficult with people in remote locations if everybody has the ability to raise a point of order, make an amendment, speak for or against a particular motion, call for the question, and engage in real-time deliberation. That can be more difficult. But I think if we looked into the idea of remote locations, then you don't have the technology challenge of perhaps being hacked or in some other way interfered with. But you also, if you had remote locations, you still foster the fellowship and the interaction that really is one of the highlights of the annual meeting, whether you're talking about the national convention or the state convention. It's that fellowship and camaraderie that often occurs not only in the meetings with the singing and the preaching, hearing the reports, but the fellowship that naturally occurs in the hallway, in the vendor section, the bookstore, and things of that nature. I think just simply looking into that would be a great encouragement to, especially to our volunteer pastors, our bivocational pastors, our pastors who pastor smaller congregations who may not have the budget or the time to underwrite them traveling around the country for 3 or 4 days If you try to stay anywhere near the annual meeting, you're going to spend sometimes $200 a night or more just for the hotel. And so I think some remote locations where you have to be there in person in real time is something that the SBC should very seriously look into. And I have been in proper channels an advocate for that, and I would continue to do so.
All right, Mike, I'm going to take it back here for a minute, and then we'll go back to some online questions here in just a few. Let's talk about another one of the big issues that's been floating around the last couple of years, actually, and that is when the convention in Birmingham approved this Resolution 9. Among Southern Baptists who follow it at all, you don't have to say much more than Resolution 9. But it was about critical race theory and intersectionality. Kind of came right through, and a lot of people didn't really understand what was being voted on. Just had confidence to approve the resolution because the committee had presented it. And most resolutions are not really hotly debated for the most part at conventions over the years, at least ones I've been at, a number of them since back in the mid 80s. What is your perspective on this Resolution 9 as it was, but what needs to be done now? Because there has been so much upheaval and division about it.
Yeah. I was not in favor of Resolution 9. I'm not in favor of it today. I don't think that has to come across. It's certainly not in my heart as a personal attack against those brothers and sisters that served on the Resolutions Committee, but I believe that it was a serious misstep about the approach that we should be taking. And I'm not in favor of CRT and the intersectionality approach, not because I deny the reality of racism in the world. I live here in the heart of Southeast Georgia. I see it not necessarily on a daily basis, but I see it on a regular basis. And from time to time, you can even see it in the life and in the heart of believers. So I don't oppose those approaches because I'm opposed to reconciliation and things of that nature. I'm opposed to it because I believe that those ideologies are incompatible with the Bible. And by the way, the Council of Seminary Presidents unanimously stated that they believe that CRT and intersectionality are incompatible with the Baptist faith and message, which I think that is a Baptist way of saying it's incompatible with the scriptures. But I think that they are not tools of unity, but weapons of division. And we've actually seen that, in my estimation, we've seen that since the Birmingham Convention. We have seen a lot of confusion, a lot of tension, a lot of animosity because of that. Now, to your question about what I think should be done with it, there's question as to whether or not a resolution from a parliamentary standpoint can actually be rescinded. And so I'm not necessarily an advocate of rescension, but I do believe that there is a great case to be made for a resolution to be offered at the Nashville Convention that speaks with clarity, with compassion, and with grace that that we believe that Resolution 9 was a misstep, and that the Southern Baptist Convention does not embrace, even as useful analytical tools, those unbiblical theories and ideologies that are completely incompatible with what we believe the scriptures to teach.
What would be your response back to then some of our African American families, churches, pastors, brothers who have really felt a pushback against, kind of that stand? I mean, how do you try to bridge that with them to say, hey, look, we don't want this to break fellowship, as it has done in several cases already?
Yeah, it already has. One thing that I was asked at a pastor's gathering recently, why are opponents of CRT making such a big deal out of this? And I do think it's important that we note from a chronological perspective, the opponents of critical race theory are not the ones who brought this subject up and injected it into the bloodstream of Southern Baptist conversation. But we do have it among us now. And it's one reason why I stated a moment ago that a resolution that I think can bring clarity should be done with grace. It should be done with compassion. It should be done with respect. But the greatest respect that we need to have is a respect for the authority and sufficiency of the Word of God. And we should do that and then call everyone, every Southern Baptist of every age, every demographic, every ethnicity, to gather around our one sacred effort, our common bond, our common doctrine, and seek to spread the gospel. So I think a lot of that is just going to have to happen through challenging but needful conversations. But the need of those conversations should not dictate what direction we are heading. I think we should head in the direction of clarifying our belief in the sufficiency of the Scripture.
All right. Thank you, Brother Mike, for that response. So let's throw it back over to Pastor Randy. Do we have some more questions?
Yeah, this one's going to be a little bit. I've got two here. They come from the same person, and so I'm going to kind of lump them together. But I can only post one at a time up here. But the other one's just really a follow up to this question. So basically, let me read. It's long. Do you support an outside independent investigation or an investigation by an appointed EC task force similar to the one that was done with the ERLC to investigate and report on the claims and disagreements between Dr. McCraney and NAMB and Azale, even similar claims made by Gilstrap and other state execs regarding Azale's abuse of power, leveraging SBC CP monies? Now, to follow up with that, let me go ahead and give that to you. And if you were elected as SB president, would you commit to calling for such an independent investigation and/or task force to be initiated and conducted? That's a big one.
Yeah, I'm looking down away from the camera a little bit, just trying to make sure that I
read that question.
Understand the question properly.
Sure.
As I understand the question, just right here on the spot, I would not be in favor of that at this time, simply because the executive committee doesn't have governing authority over the entities. What triggered the bylaw authority related to the ERLC task force was those requests that were coming from state convention leadership and other predominantly state convention leadership, because that kind of triggers some very specific language in the governing documents of the convention. For that reason, I think if such a task force like that were to be warranted at the executive committee level, there would need to be those requests coming from state convention leadership. As I understand it, I was not an officer when I think there's 6 state conventions that came together, non-Southern states that came together and sent a letter to the executive committee, and the EC officers worked as that sort of committee, de facto ad hoc committee, and looked into that. My understanding at this point is that there was not a request for a task force of this nature. Again, I could be misspeaking there just factually, because I'm not an officer and have not been an officer since these questions were raised. But at this point, I think I would be an advocate that we allow the court case itself to work its way through. And if there's concern coming from our state convention partners or other entity partners, that would most directly trigger some bylaw governing document authority that's given to the executive committee.
So it also, Mike, I just wanted to, I got another question here I wanted to throw in there, and I think Bobby wanted to step back in for a second. But let's see, this one also, Zach asked a question earlier, but so what are your thoughts on the Beth Moore and how she's been treated?
Well, just to be very candid, I'm not an enemy of Ms. Moore, but never really been a fan or follower of her ministry. I feel like in a lot of cases she spoke in ways that reference extra biblical revelation, things that God was saying to her directly. There were other things that she taught that I was troubled by, but it's always a grievous thing when someone feels like they are no longer a part of your fellowship. So I don't take an approach like, don't let the door hit you on the way out. But just personally, my church has not used her Bible studies in probably 12 to 13 years.
Very good. Well, let's jump back into a couple of more things as we wrap up, and we may have another question or two come in here. But we talked some about the North American Mission Board, and our family were appointed for 10 years by the North American Mission Board and have always been strong supporters of not just Annie, but everything going on there in the past. But it seems like of late, even though we've got a pretty good, strong marketing arm with the North American Mission Board to tell us the good stories, which are great, and you don't want to, look down upon that because God's doing some great things in some places. But the reality is the metrics are not favorable. We talked about that a while ago with the GCR. But in the last month and a half, there have been several things that have really just kind of blown up in social media and others in pastors' groups and others about the North American Mission Board because they're concerned about the way our mission dollars are being spent. One of them has been this issue about women pastors, mostly support pastors, executive pastors or whatever on staff in some of the church plants. And in some cases, the churches that are sponsoring church plants that are connected. And then the one church that actually owns a beer label and has beer made and put their label on it. And they're hosting beer and Bible, Bible studies and that kind of thing. And are actually one of the training centers for the North American Mission Board. Help us understand what do you think's happened and what do we need to do moving forward? Because those things really don't line up with the Baptist faith and message. And most people are pretty clear that biblically, the way we understand the Baptist faith and message of the Scripture, these things don't line up. So help us understand from your perspective.
Well, let me just say that at the pastoral level, we had a very significant unexpected death in our church family. So for several of the days going back a week or so ago, very tied up with that when some of these stories were really breaking in some way. My understanding is that just in the last few days, I saw on social media that the North American Mission Board has issued a clarifying statement. And as I read through that in a cursory glance related to the complementarian pastoral leadership issue, I was grateful to read that if I understood that as I read it, that they have dealt with those issues and that women serving as pastors or teaching pastors, even in some other role, would be inconsistent with the Baptist faith and message, and therefore they would not receive NAMB funding. As I understand it, if those cases come up and are identified, the NAMB would speak into those issues and see if there can be a change in the practice of that church, because I think the right approach is to always try to maintain a partner in ministry if you can, but where there is not agreement on that issue, that there would be no more funding. I think it really is symptomatic, however, of some of the unintended consequences of this shift of church planting to a national entity. The North American Mission Board, of course, is headquartered out of Alpharetta in the Atlanta, Georgia area. And I had, at the beginning and still do now, an ecclesiological problem and a practical problem with a national entity being that arm that heads up church planting. The ecclesiological problem is that while I think entities of the SBC can come along to help and resource and assist churches in the Great Commission effort, I don't find any biblical basis for a parachurch ministry being the lead agent in the planting of local New Testament churches. So I've got a little ecclesiological, well, not a little one, I've got a significant ecclesiological challenge with that. But then just from a practical perspective, there's no way that you can have an organizational structure that understands what's happening in that local church like you could if there was focus on those churches being planted through what I continue to call Baptist boots on the ground. So I think we need to focus on churches planting churches and let our national entities and agencies resource churches in that particular effort.
We talked about transparency already in several situations, but both the Executive Committee and the North American Mission Board and possibly some other entities have apparently not been as transparent as what some Southern Baptists would like. There have been requests for things like salary structures, that kind of thing. Even the North American Mission Board budget has been condensed down so much that they're spending $60+ million, and that's all it says is church planting. We don't know if that's for buying a bunch of these $500,000 houses they've bought. We don't know if it's for funding support, for the church planters, whatever it is. What are we going to do about that kind of transparency that we really need to have to affirm those who are giving the mission dollars at that point? And do you think as the SBC president, you can influence that?
Well, the issue would be influence because you don't have any actual authority or power. The presidency, however, does afford what is commonly called a bully pulpit. I don't care for bullies, and most of us don't like bullies, but as a figure of speech, we understand that the president has some influence in those things that you can call for. I will say that at the executive committee level, when I became the chairman, we sort of inherited what had been a precedent from a previous presidency. Uh, Dr. Frank Page is my understanding of it, that when salary structures were requested, there was a very condensed amount of information that went out. I immediately began advocating that whatever form, whatever salary structure the executive committee approved, the business and financial plan of the Southern Baptist Convention directs the entities and agencies of the convention that if any member of an SBC church requests that information, it shall be sent to them, the salary structure. So on that specific point, I don't think that an entity of the convention has the freedom to withhold that kind of information. So I advocated within the officers there, and Dr. Floyd, when he came on staff, was in agreement with that. Took some time to change those policies based on the meeting schedule of the executive committee. But now what is distributed is that range that is at the paper that's actually approved by the executive committee. That is the salary structure. I think anytime that your governing documents call for information to be available, then that's what the convention intended for that entity to make available. So I think that information should be as available as the business and financial plan. I will also say that a more systemic approach and a longer term healthy approach is to make sure that you have a committee on committees, a committee on nominations, and then nominees that would serve as trustees to the various boards of these agencies that share those convictions, because that's really where the rubber meets the road in Baptist polity, is to have at least a majority of the members of that board who are willing to have that kind of transparency and can help lead and govern the entity and the agency in that way. So if you don't have the right trustees, and if you don't have proper trustee training that emphasizes that the trustees are to hold that entity in trust for the churches of the Southern Baptist Convention, not for the entity head or for the entity employees, but for the Southern Baptist Convention and its churches, that's really where you're going to have the long-term change that leads to transparency and accountability. And that is a commitment that I would have if elected as president. It starts with the appointment of that committee on committees, and to make sure that those people share these convictions and are committed to only nominating a nominating committee that shares that conviction right on down the line until you get to the actual men and women who would sit on the boards.
Very good. All right, let me throw it back over to Pastor Randy in North Carolina. He has a question for us right now.
Wrong scene. There we go. Let's get that one there. Hey, Mike, just wanted to raise this as a question because, with all the stuff going on with the ERLC, the NAMB, with the amicus brief, with critical race theory, man, all these things can eclipse what matters the most at the end of the day. And these are not unimportant, and I know that. But aside from all the issues that we're debating and arguing about, what is it that you want to bring to the table as president? I mean, what drives you to want to accept this responsibility?
There's really one primary thing, and when I share with pastors, and if viewers go to my website and watch videos or read my writings, there is one primary passion. I list it first in my 3 emphases because it is first on my heart, and it will be first in my priority. And that is a renewed call and passion for evangelism across the Southern Baptist Convention. That is what our founders called our one sacred effort, the propagation of the gospel. And I just want to take this opportunity. I think somewhere in here, I thought I had this. This is a card for Vision 2025. This is a strategic, it is a bold visionary plan put forward by our EC president, Dr. Ronnie Floyd, and I wholeheartedly support that. One of the key components of Vision 2025, and the convention is going to have a chance to affirm that, Lord willing, when we meet in Nashville, is a turnaround in the decline in baptisms. This plan specifies really focusing on our 12 to 17-year-olds, those that are middle schoolers and high schoolers. But if you look at the stats that are most recently available, we've seen our lowest number of nationwide baptisms since 1939. And in 1939, baptisms were on the increase. I have a strategic plan. I won't take time to go into it right here, Brother Randy, but I do have a very specific and strategic plan to call the churches, all the churches that would be involved of the Southern Baptist Convention, to a renewed emphasis on evangelism. I have a plan and a strategy that can create partnerships and cooperation across the state, the individual state, across state lines, between conventions, between churches of different sizes, and even methodological approaches, because my number one passion, and I think it's the reason the Southern Baptist Convention ultimately exists, is for the spreading of the gospel of Jesus Christ to every person in every town, every city, and every nation in the world. Despite our differences, and Southern Baptists are a very diverse group, there is one thing that I believe every Southern Baptist watching this video agrees on, and that is that people without a personal relationship with Christ are lost in their sins, separated from God, and if they die in that condition, they will perish forever. We have the message of the gospel, and we must prioritize that as our mission. I'm grateful for the chance to take some questions and give some answers, and I've given those answers based on the questions that have been asked of me tonight. But if you just opened up the microphone and told me that I could talk to Southern Baptists about any issue that was on my heart, I would talk to you about the need to see men and women and boys and girls hear the gospel, receive the gospel, and trust Jesus as their Savior, and then to walk and grow in discipleship as followers of the Lord Jesus. That's my passion, and if elected as president, that would unequivocally be my number one passion and my number one emphasis.
Thank you, Brother Mike. I appreciate that answer.
Let me follow up to Randy's question, and you started into it there, but I want to give you a platform to finish it up a little bit. We talked about lots of different issues. I mean, the transparency, we talked about issues with the entities, all that kind of thing. And you've just talked about your passion for evangelism. And there's no question that that's so important in our convention. But let me wrap up with this final question. What actions as the president do you think that you can take to make an impactful difference in what's happening in the convention right now, and really kind of reforming, redirecting, moving us back where we need to be at that point? What are just some specific actions that you can take to help us?
Well, I really do think that evangelistic emphasis will be a rising tide that could lift all boats. That's not a cure-all for organizational challenges, for accountability and transparency issues. But I will tell you, if Southern Baptists will lift up our eyes collectively and individually to the fields that are white unto harvest, you can't spend time looking for lost souls to reach with the gospel and have as much time to focus on these other things that so quickly and so easily divide us. So I would spend a great deal of my time, effort, and energy unveiling and leading out to help implement a nationwide strategy for wave revivals. They would occur in the spring and in the fall of 2022, which would be the first full year of a potential 2-year presidency. And I know I'm not the only person in the convention that has a heart for evangelism. That's the heart and passion of our EC president, Dr. Ronnie Floyd. Dr. Johnny Hunt, who's leading the Hoosier One emphasis through NAMB, convicts me so many times when I'm around him and hear his passion and his desire and his own practice as a personal soul winner. And so that is something that I would spend my time really focusing on. And I think that would be something that would turn around the decline in cooperative program, because we live in a day we're seeing a generation coming behind that is not brand loyal. They're not company loyal in any way. And so when it comes to turning around the serious decline in the cooperative program, money is not going to follow a program. Money will follow mission, and money will follow vision. And when we put forward a bold plan and a bold agenda to reach the world with the gospel, such as, and again, I'm going to hit it again, such as Vision 2025, I think that's something that Southern Baptists will rally around with our mission dollars. And I think in the process of that, we do have some of these other issues that we need to address. But if we do not fix the problem that we have in the area of evangelism, seeing lost people come to faith in Christ, nothing else that we do is ultimately going to matter. Every preacher watching this has preached before that there are only two things on earth that are going to continue to exist in heaven, and that's the Word of God, which will stand forever, and the eternal souls of men, women, and boys and girls. So that, with no apology whatsoever, that will be my primary emphasis.
Well, I think most everyone can say amen to that and the importance of evangelism because it really is. Pastor Mike, we are so grateful to you tonight for joining us and spending this time in this live Q&A. We appreciate it. Very valuable to help everybody. And so we just greatly appreciate it. So we're going to sign off. So any final words you'd like to make?
Well, I just want to encourage everybody, if you want to follow our ministry, you can go to pastormikestone.com. That web address has been on the screen. I've got a preaching podcast as well as just a pastor-to-pastor ministry podcast. You can connect with us in a lot of different ways, including there's an email address that's on that website. And if there's a question that I can answer for any Southern Baptist directly, I want to make myself available. That's one of the ways that I think that we can foster greater involvement from normative churches and Southern Baptists all across the nation. This video presentation tonight is an example of that. So I'll just close by saying, Brother Bobby, Brother Randy, thank you for making this available. I think it's a real ministry to grassroots Southern Baptists, and it's been a privilege to join with you tonight.
Thank you again. Well, for our SBC 21 Presidential Nominees Q&A Facebook group, I'm Bobby Gilstrap, and for our moderators, we appreciate you joining us and participating, and we'll talk to you next time as we hope to interview our other two candidates as well in the weeks ahead. Good night.